Basically, we know what is UBO and how the things are, but I'm going to bring up some of the critical elements which are open to the discussion. So we have seen the UAE has turned out into a very different domain area in the last couple of months, or you can say couple of years, where they started looking at much more than the organization, their trade license and other things. So UBO is one of that. So I'm going to bring up the discussion like why and how and whom to declare. All those things, all those three things are becoming critical from a UBO perspective. As a word automatically says is ultimate beneficial owner. So whatever structure we have or whatever organization we have, who are ultimately holding the ownership or control of the organization, that is becoming a critical and important part. Here, a lot of countries have very different rules, and if I say there are rules in various countries where they try to find out, is there any bomb body which is not being known to us and who is technically operating the business at the back end? So that is what it talks about. In India, I can talk about there is a law which is called Benami Act. So they try to identify what are the people who are behind a transaction or who are holding the assets, whereas their name does not appear anywhere in the documentation. So the gist or I'll say the base of that document is also in the similar lines. But let's look at why the beneficial owner becomes a issue. So there are a lot of things which people have done and are currently also doing. That is mainly to obscure that how the beneficial owner details can be hidden. So it's done by various forms and fashions. One I can say is to start with a shell company. So a lot of people, what they do is they create a company which in the tax-free zones or a tax havens or any kind of a jurisdiction which is not very regulated activity. So when you create a shell company and that shell company comes and owns any asset or organization, let's say we are talking UAE, then the ownership, that who are the people behind it, it's completely hidden. So that's where a lot of people have done those things. There are complex ownership which people create, so that becomes a multi-layer activity. You have 5 or 6 companies in between the true owner and the target company, so that also becomes a quite a layering activity. As we know, banks in UAE have started looking at more details since 2014 2015. I can talk about where they started looking at, tell me how many layers of company ownership in between. So if there are multiple layers of ownership, they always restrict it and they say that, hold on, we are not comfortable with opening the account or opening the relationship. So that's where it goes into. Next comes bearer share and bearer share warrants. UAE does not promote any bearer shares. So none of the regulators are allowed technically to issue any bearer shares in UAE. So that's good from a UAE perspective, but still there can be a jurisdiction or a ownership where the bearer shares are issued. So that becomes a very integral part. And technically speaking, you can't know who is a beneficial owner because the shares are held by the person who is holding the physical form of the share. So it's technically like a currency note. You hand it over to the currency note and the person who holds a currency note becomes the owner. So hence it's very difficult to understand at what stage and what time who is the owner of that currency note or shares in this case. Then comes unrestricted use of legal person as a director. So you have created a company, shareholding is there, but however, you have given a complete control to one of the director, and the director is taking care of signatory. He's technically managing the whole business. So that's also kind of a beneficial ownership is being held by the director, who may be an employee. However, all the act or all the activities are being conducted by them. Next comes a formal nominee shareholders and directors, where identity of nominee is undisclosed. So there are two methods what normally people use for a nominee shareholder. One is I create Mr. X and tell him you be in the front and call yourself as a shareholder or a director, but I'll guide you what to be done. So I'm sitting at the back end and guiding everything in the front side. So that's a one form of it. The second comes an informal nominee shareholder and director, where it comes is I have taken 5% share. I taken 5% share of my wife also, my daughter also, my brother also. So in total, all the shares are held by my close associates or a family member. And I, by default, being the part of the family or being the part of the associate, I control the whole business. So that's also becomes a informal nominee shareholder structure where things are being hidden. Next comes a trust and another legal arrangement. So a lot of people believe that when we create a trust, the ownership moves from a settler, the person who settles the assets or the worth, to the people who are managing the trust. So to the trustees, technically we can say. Here also, the beneficial owner is not known because trustees act as a directors or as a nominee for the company, and you don't know what's happening behind that. And last comes is using intermediaries in forming legal persons. So intermediaries can be a professional, a chartered accountant, or a corporate service provider, or anyone who is front-ending the company on account of structures and organizations. So I don't know much in UAE perspective, but there are jurisdictions where corporate service provider is a professional activity, and the whole structure is being managed through the corporate service provider. So that's how the things goes into this. So this is the reason why they are coming up, but why in UAE? So let me give you a framework. In UAE, there is something came up on a transparency side. So this was there for a good period of time from FATF 40 recommendations. However, when in April 2020, a report was released by FATF, which says that UAE does not have a formal structure to identify and declare how many people are there in the company, how the structures are there. So in this case, there is a national economic register which UAE has adopted, and the national economic register is supposed to give to the federal authorities the complete ownership details of the companies in which you are operating or what you are operating for. So if you see, the platform aims to adopt the tools of knowledge-based economy by providing accurate, comprehensive, and instant data on existing economic license of United Arab Emirates. So in various countries, we know there are registrar of companies which are there where anyone can go with a formal fees or a formal request. You can always come to know who are the shareholders, directors, nominee directors, and all the details are very openly available. In UAE, this was not the case. Why it was not the case? There are multiple reasons. Point number one, UAE has multiple registrar offices. You talk from JAFZA to Sharjah Airport Free Zone to Abu Dhabi Airport Free Zone. So there are multiple authorities are there, and there is no central database which was available. Hence, this UBO thing has come up in such an instant fashion that they said we want to bring up all the companies into National Economic Register. You can see the link which I have provided below. If you go to the link, this is still active. They have started using this link since 2020 end of period. But the details are not very comprehensive right now. So you can go into those details and you will find maybe one shareholder name or maybe one manager's name is mentioned, but it's not comprehensive. Now, how to make it comprehensive is what the UBO stand came up, where they started moving to regulators and authorities, stating that, come on guys, you need to bring up and put on board all the shareholders detail and all the common holding details so that the people know how the shareholding is being mentioned. So this is where Cabinet Resolution 58, which is what you also referred, that we are talking about this session in the today's about all this point. So this section came and I'll refer to not too many things, but the important point which tells us why and what we need to do. The Article 3, which very clearly says that every registrar and legal person licensed or registered in state, including the commercial free zone. So they brought up all the free zones as part of the regulation. However, they have excluded two categories. One, they said which is wholly owned by federal or local government. Don't bring up as part of a UBO declaration side. So which is being excluded. And they excluded the financial free zone. So as we talk right now, there are two financial free zones in UAE, which is DIFC and ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Market and Dubai International Financial Center. So they've excluded these two financial free zones and the federal or local government. The logic is very clear. In federal and local government, when it is wholly owned, you don't need to define who are the shareholders and don't need to bring up the part of sovereign capacity. That's one. Second, financial free zone already has a UBO declaration story, and they already have the regulation in-house, and that's where the things are working from their perspective. So they excluded, as I said, financial free zone and local government and federal government. Apart from that, every company which is registered in UAE is required to get into this activity. Now, how the UBO has to be identified. So they're given 5 principles. I'll use the principles and I'll define what those principles are, because this is the most important thing. And this is where the maximum confusion is coming up. So they said under Article 5, they gave 5 principles. I'll go one by one principle and I'll update you what's happening here. The first principle is whenever we are identifying a company or a legal company, we need to look at whether directly or indirectly anyone is holding 25% or more shares or voting right or control. So they used, as I said, voting right, shareholding or control. So any of these three things happen, then automatically you become part of a UBO. Now, how to identify the shareholding? There is a lot of clarity which is brought up by the authority also. For the benefit of all, I just take one example. Let's say a company A is there, which is held by company B, Mr. A, Ms. B, Mr. R. Company C is held further by company B and Ms. B. So you can see there are multiple people who are holding shares at a various capacity and a various instance. Now, how to identify this 25%? Because if you see at the first layer, you will see none of the individual, neither Mr. A, B or Mr. R is holding more than 25%, but that's not the fact. Let's get into the details. So if you see in this case, Mr. A, who is holding 20% directly, however, this person is holding 50% of shares of the 50% of the 40%. So net, if you see 10% of that shareholding is held by Mr. A. How this 10% comes up? If you see Mr. B, company B is holding 40%, which is held 50-50. That means 20% or of the main entity shareholding is here. And 50% of 20 is again comes to 10. So technically speaking, Mr. A, by direct or indirect control, is holding 30%, and hence he is a UBO and has to be declared in the all the declarations which we're going to talk about. If you see again, Ms. B, now these are simple maths, so I'm just giving you a perspective how this comes into, is holding again 20% plus 20% of indirect ownership from the company B. So it still holds 40%. Mr. R hold directly 20%, which is perfectly fine, and Z hold 10%. So logically, if you see, what we have done is we have identified all the warm bodies. When I'm saying warm bodies, I'm talking about the people who are living and who are currently present. So present means present in the world. So that's what has to come in. A legal structure has to be eliminated when we identify who are holding what shares. So in this case, if I see as a simple story, there are shares held by Mr. A 30%, B 40%, R and Z. If you see, this comes as 100%. That's what is the first requirement of a UBO. Now let me add up a simple twist. In this case example, let's say Mr. Z is a minor of Mr. R, or minor son of Mr. R, who is holding the executing rights. So now execution rights are available, since with Mr. R, we cannot call Mr. Z as a UBO, because in this case, R is directly and indirectly controlling Mr. Z shares also. So hence, in this case, the moment we have this additional facts, Mr. R becomes a UBO, and he's not holding now 20%. He's holding 20 plus 10%, which is a voting right or a controlling rights, and he becomes 30% shareholder. So these are very minuscule things which has to be looked at case to case basis, and we cannot open it as a transaction and say that perfectly fine, this is what we know and this is what we don't know. So the importance of customer due diligence is becoming important from a DNFBB perspective and UBO identification perspective also. Now, this is not the only role of the banker which used to do this. Even companies have to follow those principles. So that's where it's coming up. So this is where the final structure or the holding of A comes into play. Now, let me use a second principle which they talk about. The real beneficiary shall be tracked through the number of legal person or arrangement of any kind. So in this case, as I said, we need to identify the warm bodies. We can't call a legal structure and say that now no one holds 20%. So that's not the fact. You need to identify each 100% shareholding of a target company, which you are identifying a UBO. You need to identify the warm bodies, which is any person who is present, living structure or living person. Let me use that statement. So that goes as a very crucial element. The third principle says if more than one person participates in owning or controlling a share of legal person, all of them shall be treated as owner and controller of such shares. Example I gave you, a minor is one example. The second example can be a trust. So if you know there is a trust and we are not able to confirm how the legal shareholding is being shared by all those people, because trust can be of two types. One is the trust which has a very clear demarcation that who will get what kind of a wealth or what kind of a profit. Second is the demarcation is not clear at that stage and it is being left to the trustees. In the cases where it is being left to the trustees, we will not know who owns what percentage. In that case, we'll bring all the people and say that all are defined as a controller. So this is where the third principle comes into play. And fourth is interesting. So it says if all possible means had been used. So we have identified the shareholding, we looked at the nominee shareholders, but we are not able to identify any UBO in that case. Or you are suspicious that the natural person who has a final control ownership in the real beneficiary is not actually the shareholder. So if these two things happen, so one is we are not able to identify anyone who is holding 25 or more. Two, we are suspecting the current structure. Now in this case, controlling person who exercises control will be the UBO. So if you have a head of business or a MD or a CEO or a manager, whoever is technically signing the documents, technically controlling the documents, then only we go there. Just remind ourselves that if we are not able to identify, that's the first thing. And second is we suspect. So both these points comes as part of the discussion. Then only the controlling person who exercises control will be the UBO. So this is where it goes into and talks about. Now, there is a fifth principle. If there is no real beneficiary for the legal person in accordance with clause 4, that means we are not able to identify and we are not able to find any person who is there, then what we do? In this case, again, as I said, it comes back, sorry, just give me a back. In this case, whoever is the senior management official will be defined as the UBO of the organization. So that is where it goes into. So these are the 5 principles which are important from a UBO perspective and very critical to identify it. However, I'll take you to one more turn because this is where the critical point people are discussing. They're saying, what if the shares are being given, the UAE national shareholders are being given to a nominee? So I'll use the example or analogy here. What if there is a nominee agreement, that is side agreement or whatever name we call in the mainland? So I've given a structure what has happened here in this case. Example, I have a foreign national who is having a holding company. And on the other side, the foreign national is holding 49% share in the mainland company and the UAE national is holding 51% in the mainland company. However, just to make sure that I have a complete control as a foreign national in the UAE entity or a mainland entity, what I did, I created a holding company, and that holding company has created a nominee agreement with the UAE national. So that means if you see through the nominee, my agreement goes back to the foreign national as a 100% shareholder, which can be fine. However, there are implications which will come up to this, and we need to be very cognizant of whether those implications are aligned in the right order or not. I'll talk about 2 principles we need to look at. Point number 1, there is an Article 10, which I'm going to show you how that Article 10 spans out. And Article 5, which we just went through. 6, 7. So these are also whether we are transparent or not and all that. So the first point it talks about, whenever you create a nominee, you register that nominee with the regulator. That means we have to go to the Dubai Economic Department or Abu Dhabi Economic Department, and we have to register that I have created a nominee agreement with the UAE national. And this is how the UAE national structure spans out. Now, if you look at, this is the Federal Law number 2 of 2015 of Commercial Companies article. So Article 10 says at least 51% of the shares of the company should be held by UAE national. That's the first point it says, apart from other things. And second point, it refers to any transfer or title of any share of a partner that may affect the percentage set out in clause 1 and 2. That means when 51% share has to be held, the article shall be invalid. That means the moment we say article is invalid, automatically we are putting the company at risk because there is a mandatory condition of 51% shareholding in a company. And it clearly says that nominee agreements are not accepted and side agreements are not registered. So there is a lot of ambiguity which comes into this play. I'll come back to this slide here. Here it says if I created a nominee agreement where I made sure that UAE national is no more a controlling person. That means I need to register that nominee agreement with the economic department. If I register that agreement in the economic department, the structure of the company itself falls down. That means your legal structure itself is a question mark. It's not a limited liability company. You cannot be a part of a UAE economy unless and until you have a different trade license. So that's a very critical part. So a lot of people are saying, no, my expat is 100% shareholder because he has a side agreement and all. Those side agreements, till time it is not registered, till time it is not updated, it's not valid. Now, if it is not registered, not updated, it's not valid is one thing. But if you register and update also, the structure of the company itself becomes invalid. So it's a double edged sword. So whichever side you go, you may go wrong. So it's very important to see and rectify how these beneficial owner details are being updated. So that's an important part which comes into play. I'll come to further maybe two slides more. So here it talks whenever you change anything. So one is the first time when it happens, when the law came, they said 60 days, but those days keep extending. So as we talk, Abu Dhabi initially said till end of March, you should have updated your UBO register. JAFZA was also same thing, but JAFZA is extended till 15th of April. So as we talk, tomorrow is the last day for JAFZA. And hence every regulator is giving the different timelines. So maybe if you want to check from your regulator perspective, you need to talk to them, write to them, or they must have sent an email to you for those benefits. The second thing which talks about, if you change anything within 15 days, you need to update the register with the regulator. So when you say change can be a nominee change, can be through the shareholding change, can be through any mechanisms or means which we are doing. So if you change the shareholding, you need to update within 15 days to the registrar, and the details which need to be captured are quite a multifold. So it talks about the name, nationality, date of birth, residential address, passport number, or any kind of identity number which we are using. So these are the basic details which every UBO they are looking at. Now, as we told, UBO, they are trying to identify the ownership structure. So when they're trying to identify the ownership structure, they want to know who is the right person also whom to talk to. So that's where the UBO register comes into play. Just a quick snapshot for the benefit of all. So for Abu Dhabi, if you want to register yourself or as a UBO or update yourself as UBO, you need to get into Abu Dhabi Business Center, and I had given you the link on the top, and there are various steps. There are 5 or 6 steps which need to be followed. You need to type all the information so that the information can be registered. So once registered, you will get a notification that the document is registered. But before doing all those things, your company has to be linked with the business center from Abu Dhabi perspective. So this is Abu Dhabi Mainland. For Jebel Ali, you need to get into the Dubai Trade Portal, and there is a service menu. Within that, there is a registration. Within that, there is a UBO form which need to be filled. So it's quite a lengthy form. It talks about all the directors, shareholders details to be captured. Generally, we have seen it takes around maybe 1.5 to 2 hours to completely fill the information if you have that information handy. So around 1.5 hours, you should always believe that it will take. DED, it's interesting because they have issued the format, or you can see the 3-page format, which I've just tried to bring up in the one slide. So this format has to be converted into your letterhead in Arabic and English, and the information of the UBO has to be updated and submitted. So this is where the Dubai Economic Department comes into play. So that's it from my side. I'll take a rest. I think it's a 20-25 minutes, which we have taken. Yoga